Greetings once again to each and all. This is John Lash, the main Turton, and the preceptor of Planetary Tantra, recording on the 30th of August 2015. I hadn't expected to make this recording, but here I am in any case. Call it a desperate move, if you will, or just another act of irrepressible self-expression. Anyway, I'm calling this talk Scratching the VV Itch. And I would point out that I'm making this talk and you will be listening to it, those of you who open the email in the general mailing, and I realize that's not all of you, far from it. But if you open this message as soon as you receive it, you'll be listening to this talk under a unique celestial omen. Right now, if you went out in the morning and you had a flat horizon and good viewing conditions, just before the sun rose, you would be able to see the conjunction of Venus and Mars. This conjunction takes place in the claws of the crab, very close to the borderline between the crab and the lion. Now, you may recall in my last message, which was a written text with no recording, I went into the rather complex details regarding the current shift. That is to say, the Shodashi shift that began on the 15th of August, Saturday, the 15th of August. And I explained in those notes some technicalities which will bring to mind the briefings of the Gaian navigation experiment, namely that there was a switch off between Venus and the moon. And whereas the moon would normally have revealed itself in the lion, thus signaling a Bhairavi shift, instead, the moon passed on and the shift went to Shodashi, associated with the following constellation in the natural sequence, constellation of the Virgin. So the event that actually announced the current shift was the crescent moon in the face of the Virgin, about 2 or 3 days after the new moon of the 14th of August. So I explained that there had been considerable build-up toward the Bhairavi shift, a considerable expectation for a number of reasons. One being that that was the moment when I indicated I would bring the Kalika war party out of stealth mode. The second, which had perhaps, the second consideration which had perhaps crossed some of your minds, was that it would be the moment under Bhairavi to move ahead with certain strategies relating to the lethal strike. So the moment of this shift in August was loaded with expectations and anticipations. But as I explained, due to the way the moon, in its final moment on the 14th of August, passed by Venus in the claws of the crab, there was a kind of switchover and a kind of relay activity among the Dakini energies. I read that quite simply today, leaving all the technicalities aside, to indicate that the developments coming from the completion of the Venus retrograde cycle on the 7th of September, the developments going forward into October will indicate what the Bhairavi shift would otherwise have brought into manifestation. So we've bought some time, in a sense. Some of you have written me in full understanding of this peculiar and anomalous situation. Remember that Shodashi is the Dakini most intimately associated with beauty. One of her names, Sundari or Tripura Sundari, means the beautiful one. Sundari means beautiful in Sanskrit. Sundara is the male form. Sundari, the female form. Lovely word, Sundari. So, whatever happens now with you in planetary Tantra, whatever the degree of your engagement, your commitment, and how can I know that unless I see you face to face? I can't. Whatever proceeds for the Kalika War Party from this moment on, and the party is far from over, it proceeds in beauty. Everything proceeds in beauty. Beauty is the ultimate weapon of correction. And it's also the ultimate weapon of protection and liberation in your individual lives. When you come into planetary Tantra and you learn the elements of the practice, the main factor that becomes part of your life when you realize that you don't have a life of your own anymore is, of course, the narrative. The power of the narrative is everything. So there is a Sophianic narrative, which I have not invented. I recovered it from the mysteries, and I have honed it, restored it, and to a certain degree, with great caution, extrapolated it. The question before those of you who listen to me as a teacher is how the power of this narrative is going to overthrow and defeat the power of the other narrative, the other main narrative on this planet, along with the subsidiary narratives or subplots that are carried by the main narrative. What is the main narrative on this planet? It is the narrative of the false creator God, the male who creates without assistance or participation of a divine female counterpart. It is the narrative of what I call the Palestinian Redeemer complex in Not in His Image. The four components are the complex of the complex, let me remind you, are the creation of this world that we inhabit and of the natural world by an off-planet male deity. The second point is the choosing of the chosen ones, the election of the chosen ones who have a mission to serve the off-planet deity. The third point is the messianic complex, the coming of the Messiah, who represents an ideal for humanity, but also a punitive, judging agency. And fourth, the apocalyptic outcome of that entire scenario. That narrative is the main narrative operating on this planet, and it operates equally through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I might add that it even operates in covert ways through those vast numbers of people on the planet who have not been necessarily directly indoctrinated into the Abrahamic religions. The key to that scenario, the key to its power, lies in a single word that you need to understand. That word is not evil. Remember the Gnostic teaching, which I convey to you. Evil is a human construct. The purpose of the Kalika War Party is to eliminate social evil. Evil is that behavior which is deliberately inflicted by some human animals on other human animals, inflicted from the will to harm, the will to deceive, the will to manipulate, to dominate, to divide. If you have any doubts about the power of this narrative, then just look at the behavior of human animals today, and you will see that human society is swamped in evil due to the operation of this narrative in human minds. I would add a Gnostic point of finesse. I would add a Gnostic nuance. The evil done by human animals is done by them alone. It is not a cosmic evil. There is no cosmic origin of evil. The demiurge, the Lord Archon, is not evil. Lord Archon is dangerous. Lord Archon is deceitful. But the evil human beings do is of their own doing. It is of their own responsibility. But the narrative directs human animals toward the commitment of such evil. Therefore, the narrative must be defeated if social evil on the planet is to be eliminated. So there's a battle between two narratives going on. I've been talking about this for a number of years now. I'm making this talk impromptu and with great reticence because I really do not like to wire myself up to this headset and stand here alone in this small office and talk to a computer. I really don't like it. It makes me feel really sad. It makes me feel exasperated. And I'm fed up and sick and tired of doing this. In fact, I have 2 more recorded talks to deliver in this manner. You might be surprised to hear that. Probably you may have assumed that Out of Time was the last talk. I have 2 other talks to bring closure to my teaching experiment in this manner. One of them is called The Extravagance of Truth. And the last one, the last talk, is called The Non Plus Ultra. So I had set myself up to do those talks, and I didn't think that I would do the one I'm doing now. But I have to do this to get certain things out of my way and out of my system. I am still in deep transition, going deeper than ever. The transition involves every aspect of my life, particularly the material aspect, the physical conditions under which I live, and more and more and more. Here I'm changing the parameters for the audio input with less of an echo. So, I'm doing this recording for myself, really, and for closure. I wish it to be of value to you, as I will bring to focus some of the key questions that you face in your life, that you face knowing about the Sophianic narrative, knowing about planetary Tantra, knowing about correction. You face the world on the large scale and in the intimate details of your personal life. You face it in a different way than you would did you not know those things. And so let's see what I can tell you about facing up to that challenge, because it is a great, great challenge. I just said a moment ago that evil is not the word, not the key word to bring into discourse right now. No, I realized some time ago that the key word, the deal breaker, is cruelty and not evil. I realized this probably about a year ago when I came across a documentary on YouTube about the black ops activities of the United States government in Central America. And it was an expose, obviously, of the dirty business of the United States government in overthrowing those countries and enforcing its agenda. Now, I've seen other documentaries on these subjects. Perhaps you have as well. I've also seen Yuri Lina's documentary with dramatization about the Russian Revolution. You may recall that I warned you about the Yuri Lina film, and I said it's a strong test for your guts to watch this film. Well, I was surprised when I came across this other film, and I'm not going to go and bother to look for it because I can't be bothered. But this other film exposing CIA black ops in Central America, I was surprised that it was worse. It was worse than the Yuri Lina film, and I almost came to the point of turning it off. I think it ran to 6 episodes. I could barely watch it. This documentary triggered something in me. It triggered the question that formed in this manner. Okay, so the United States government sent in military force and advisors and consultants and provided the money for certain factions in these Latin American countries to do the bidding of the Defense Department of the United States and to do the bidding of those warmongers and psychopathic fiends who run those organizations, the military, the Pentagon. Okay. So the USA, which is the country of my origin, the land of my origin, the benighted nation of my origin, goes in and gives the means and instruction to some native peoples in these countries, some native people of Latin America, of Nicaragua, and other countries. And then, and the main motive here is to terrorize, the population and to enforce the agenda, which is never stated. It's always a secret agenda. What struck me so hard and what shocked me about what I saw in these documentaries was the extent of the cruelty and sadistic behavior demonstrated by those who carried out the mission they received from certain powers in the United States. They did not just go into villages and shoot a few people or wave guns around and do the things that would terrorize peasants, and it's not really difficult to terrorize peasants, burn down their fields, burn down their villages. They didn't just do that. They did it in extremis, with a violent and sadistic extreme of cruelty that is really, really hard to conceive. And so my question was, where from this cruelty? Now, human beings, human animals may harm each other and they may kill each other. And they may certainly subject each other to unpleasant situations. But the extent of cruelty to which they can go, that raises another issue to me. The extent of cruelty to which human beings can go in acting out social evil is an issue unto itself. Therefore, I put it to you that cruelty is an issue unto itself. And I'm going to tell you exactly what cruelty is. Cruelty is the expression coming out of the human animal of a terrible, ambiguous emotion that operates in the human soul. When the narrative of the Lord Archon infects the human mind, it produces in the emotional base of the human animal a terrible, ambiguous, or ambivalent feeling. The source of this feeling is due to one particular factor of the narrative. That factor is the punitive will of the Creator God. The narrative says that the Creator God is punitive and has a vicious and sadistic punitive vengeance. Therefore, anyone who is touched by the narrative is infected by that factor. The infection is of a peculiar kind because it consists of fear that you would be the target of the vicious and cruel punitive action of the Creator God, fear, but also it incites or invites a defiance against the threat that God would punish you. That's the natural response of the human animal, and that is a sane response. However, because the animal, or as long as the human animal caught in that narrative, remains in that narrative, there is no way to defy the narrative except by, in some manner, acting it out. That is the great, great tragedy of the human species. That is the one single factor in the psychological dynamics of the narrative that is most likely to bring the human species down into insanity and self-destruction. So even though the healthy human animal in whom the narrative has introduced this impulse and this fear, would naturally and normally reject it, there is no way to reject it while still subject to the narrative. The only way to reject it is to go to another narrative that has the power to defeat the narrative that says that the ultimate Creator God of this world, of the entire cosmos and everything that is materially manifest, is also a deity who has the will to punish and to exercise extreme cruelty upon the subjects of the world he has created. You follow me? You may know that over a century ago, well over a century, Friedrich Nietzsche died in August of 1900, in the same month as the great Russian mystic, Sophianic mystic, Vladimir Soloviev. But you may recall that Nietzsche became infamous for his doctrine of the will to power. Unfortunately, it was through Nietzsche's sister, Elizabeth Forster Nietzsche, who co-opted and hijacked this term and gave it a spin. And from that moment on, it was said to have become part of the driving agenda of the Nazi Party. This is a really dirty, twisted up story. The will to power, as Nietzsche described it, has not been understood correctly in the sense that he meant it until this day. You need to read Walter Kaufmann on Nietzsche if you want to clear up that point. But apart from that little digression, I would offer you a concept that Nietzsche himself would have found interesting, if I may be so bold as to say so, and that is the will to cruelty. Every human animal has the will to cruelty in his or her soul as long as that narrative has been implanted, as long as that narrative has some influence over the human mind,
the will to cruelty will be present. Now, I've often used the example of a toggle switch. I talk about toggle switches now and then, don't I? I find this a useful analogy. I'm going to try it again here. Let's say that along with that narrative of the false creator God, who is capable of inflicting and who indeed takes joy and righteous power in inflicting punishment upon the subjects of his world. In that narrative, contained in that narrative, is a toggle switch which is automatically self-installed in the human mind once the narrative has been accepted, once the narrative has been heard, even if it hasn't been accepted. Consider that. Now, this toggle switch has three positions. The first position is a position of fear, where the human animal fears the punishment of the Father God and then acts accordingly. The human animal constructs and fabulates an interior monologue. Oh, God would punish me if I did this. God will not punish me if I do that. And so on it goes. Belief drives behavior, and belief is scripted in the narrative. So the narrative drives the behavior of fear, and many people fear the punishment of the Creator God, and they adopt or adapt and conduct their lives accordingly. Therefore, their lives are run by a total fiction and a lie. The other side of the toggle switch is a defiance. Those who feel a certain sense of defiance, well, maybe the God who created this whole world that I see is able to punish me. Maybe the God is disposed to punish me, that God. But I defy that risk. That is a risk I face. I defy that risk. And how am I going to defy that risk? Well, suppose that I take this course. I designate myself in the psychotic fiction of my own mind to be an instrument of God's vengeance, and therefore I can act out the vengeance on others. I can punish them, and in doing so absolve myself of the risk that I will be punished. Are you following me? There's a second course of action that can be taken from this second setting of the toggle switch. Well, I will not just act out the punishment and sadistic cruelty of God because I am afraid that God will turn it upon me, but I will act it out as a statement of my defiance against God. You see, it works both ways. The second setting of the toggle switch in itself has two settings. Complicated switch, huh? So you can act out the punitive fury of God, which is utterly cruel, telling yourself that you're an instrument of God, or you can do it and saying, I'm a God unto myself. I get a big thrill out of doing this, and this is most likely the case that applies to the horrific examples that I've cited from this documentary about CIA intervention in Central America. And also, the Russian Revolution. How is it conceivable that a mere 200 committee members and ideologues who are Jewish Bolsheviks, got some Russian people to do what they did to those other Russian people? Well, the fear of punishment was everywhere. The fear of punishment, Stalin was God. You would be punished by Stalin, or else you would be the agent of Stalin in punishing others. You see, it was just an acting out of this syndrome that I'm telling you about. So there are the two positions of the switch. Many people, many pious Christians, as well as Jews and Muslims, demonstrate the behavior of the first position of the switch, the fear position. And they tell themselves in the psychotic fabulations of their own minds that they fear God, and they adjust and adopt their behavior according to that psychosis. The second position of defiance, as I said, has two settings, which I just described. Finally, to complete the analogy, I might add that every one of you has the choice to set the switch to the neutral position. The neutral position is the position of pacifism. The neutral position is the position that says, I will not use violence because all violence is cruel. That's the neutral position. That's the coward's way out. All violence, all expression of violent force, either to deter harm or to terminate those who do harm, is not cruel. I do not recommend any action in the Kalika War Party that is cruel unless it be a personal choice in a particular situation of vengeance. For instance, I'll use the obvious example. If I had a daughter and someone raped her, and I got my hands on the perpetrator, and I was certain who the perpetrator was, I would terminate that individual. And I would consider the option of doing so in an extremely painful manner so that I could watch this individual die in pain for the satisfaction that it would give me. I leave the option open to those in the Kalika War Party to pursue that course of action in the name of vengeance. So, some expression of cruelty is allowable, but I insist on principle that the action of the Kalika War Party and the action of any of you who opposes the narrative of evil on this planet does not require you to be cruel, but it does require you either to use violence or to support those who have the courage to do so. So, I come now to the 30-minute mark of this recording, and I would sum up what I've said so far as the hard option in correction. Taking responsibility to eliminate social evil is the hard option. Now I'm going to change my tone, and I'm going to change my delivery in order to offer those of you who still cannot accept the hard option with the soft option. The soft option is that you don't have to go there if you can't go there. You don't have to consider joining the Kalika War Party, in which the 5 front bands apply lethal force or deterrent force to perpetrators of social evil. No. You can join the other 12 bands, and you're not obligated to commit yourself to that sacred mission. So the soft option is what I want to talk to you about now, and I'd like to give you some encouragement as I do so by offering some observations I have that show that the battle for the narrative is shifting. I have some observations that indicate how the battle for the narrative is shifting in favor of the narrative of the goddess and her power and her beauty and her power-sharing arrangement with the anthropos, which I call planetary tantra. Now, in order to segue into the soft option, let me ask you, what scenarios of human behavior in history might have crossed your mind as I was speaking in the first half hour of this recording. When I talk about the behavior of human animals who take it upon themselves to be the instrument of God's vengeance, the wrath of God, the punishing off-planet creator God. When I speak of people who have taken this mission upon themselves and have acted out the punition and judgment of God in an extremely cruel fashion upon other human animals, well, what scenarios come to your mind? I'm sure there are many scenarios that cross your mind. Well, there's no short supply of incidents in human history that would fit that description, are there? But I wonder if there is one particular scenario that comes to mind, that crossed your mind while I was making my attempt to elucidate the implantation of cruelty in the human animal and the way it comes to be acted out. I'm wondering if the scenario of the persecution of witches ever crossed your mind. Now, there's a lot of history about the witch trials and the witch craze in Europe, as it is called. And there is, of course, the famous incident of the Salem witch trials in the colonies at the end of the 17th century, correct? The movie The Crucible by Arthur Miller, or the play The Crucible by Arthur Miller, has been made into a film which many of you have perhaps seen. The film of The Scarlet Letter with Demi Moore is not worth seeing, as it's just a sentimental valentine. But there have been films made, bad films usually, such as The Season of the Witch, made in 2011 with Nicolas Cage. And up and coming now, the film called The Witch, just released in January of this year. I would add to this short list of relevant public media, because we're talking here about the exopsyche, the film world, the TV and cable movie world, okay? There could be a long list of films dealing with witchcraft, but I would add to the short list, because we don't have much time, the cable series called Salem, which is, I believe, going into its third season. So I just watched season 1 of Salem, to which I was introduced by a young Kalika of my acquaintance. And watching this series brought up some reflections which compelled me to make the recording in which I am speaking to you right now. I won't elaborate or comment upon Salem. I don't advise anyone to watch it. I think it's very clunky and melodramatic. As dramatic fare, it's junk fare. But there is one element, there is one twist in the overall plot structure of Salem that I would bring to your attention. The writers are attempting to tell the story of the Salem witch craze from the point of view of the witches. And the plot of the story is that the witches, the twist of the story, the neat twist, the novel twist, is that the witches do not necessarily use the power of their witchcraft to battle against the Puritans. No. They do in some cases. They have the option to use their witchcraft, but the way they are shown to do so is, in fact, a weak and failing point of the series. I'll return to that observation in a moment. The twist in the plot of Salem is how the witches, some of whom are integrated in the community and hiding among the community of Puritans, actually pit the Puritans against each other. They actually play upon that impulse in the Puritan soul, namely, to take upon oneself the role of the vindictive and punishing Father God. They play upon that impulse, and they cause the Puritans to actually turn against each other. The main instrument of this, or one of the main ways in which this is done, is by false accusations, false allegations. The story shows that in that time, the very mere fact of being accused of being a witch was just as good as being a witch, because if you were accused of being a witch, the chances are 1,000 to 1 that you are going to be burned or drowned and tortured, regardless of whether you are a witch or not. So Salem is kind of unique in that it shows, I think, a crack in the fracture of the human psyche that is opening up today. The series began only at the beginning of correction. Would point that out, or during correction. There's a fracture in the narrative. The fracture shows that the Puritans, that is to say the fundamentalists, that is to say those who have based their lives upon the narrative of the false creator God, are actually going to destroy each other and turn upon each other. But the witches play a role in making that happen. So the witches in Salem actually have two tactics. One is to use their own natural witchcraft, which is represented very, very badly and non-convincingly. And the other is simply to play a psychological game. And in that game, they turn the insane, vindictive cruelty of the Puritans against the Puritans, so that they use it on their own people. I think that Salem may be somewhat prophetic in this respect in regard to what can happen in the United States of America in the coming years, in the coming decades. Let it be set on record that I am of the opinion that Christianity cannot survive in the United States of America through the violent revolution that is bound to happen. Although many people who call themselves patriots and who are armed and who would defend the people of the country against the evils of the government and the feds, although many of them are Christians, their Christian belief system cannot hold up under the pressures of this coming revolution. I see a kind of tectonic eruption in the psychic plates, in the psychic zones of the people of the United States of America. I see the narrative of Puritan versus witch being replayed, but in a way that perhaps no one in their wildest imagination could ever have predicted. I see a tendency to return to the belief in witches. But that return would not resemble anything that ever happened before. And why not? Because until not so long ago, there was no such thing as planetary tantra on this planet. And planetary tantra is a system of witchcraft. It is a program of witchcraft which provides the means for human animals to enter into a pact with the infernal powers of the earth, the infernal powers of the planetary animal mother. I would point out something to you about the allegations or accusations against witches all through history. One character in Salem, in a scene, mentions the fact, and it is a very great fact, that there are many books printed, and there were famous books printed from the Middle Ages onward, or from the Gutenberg period onward, particularly the Malleus Maleficorum, the Hammer of Witches. There are many books written by people fighting witches, and many books written about what witches did or were alleged to do. But there are almost no books written by witches about what they actually did. Well, there's an incident where Increase Mather, who was a famous witch hunter in the colonies, claims that he knows a case when a witch who escaped prosecution was able to proceed with the evil ways of witches and slit the throats of 2 virgins in a satanic sacrifice. Well, this is a very good example of the kind of claims made about witches, and I mean both male and female witches and warlocks, here in the mouth of a Christian who believes in the punitive cruelty of the Father God, and indeed enacts that cruelty by torturing both men and women, makes a statement about the witches that he hunts down and persecutes and murders. But is that statement true? Were there ever upon this planet any witches or warlocks, who slit the throats of virgins in a satanic sacrifice to a goat-like Luciferic deity? We know today from the incidents of the Iraq War and the notorious topic of waterboarding that confessions attained under torture are unreliable. Well, the medieval chronicles and even later chronicles going into the Renaissance and into the period of Enlightenment contain many records of confessions of what witches did under torture. What is the truth of these confessions? What did witches actually ever do to Puritans and the flock of the faithful who follow or try to follow the authority of the Father God? What did they ever do? I put it to you that they didn't do much of anything, but the time now is the moment when witches can really act. I see the rise of witchcraft on this planet, and I am certain that it is due to take many forms. And it is my intention to release an infernal wave of witchcraft on this planet that is focused and directed like a samurai blade or like the arrow of an Apache warrior. I know that witchcraft will overcome the evil in the souls of true believers in the off-planet Father God. I know that it will. How do I know? It is my intention that it does so. And my intention, combined with the intention of others, is enough to make it happen. It's already happening. I don't know what this film, The Witch, is about. It could be a very bad horror film. To date, there has not yet been a really genuine representation of witchcraft or pagan magic from the point of view of the pagans themselves, except for perhaps The Wicker Man. You may know that film, The Wicker Man. Well, it's certainly remarkable that the trailer for the film The Witch presents the title of the film in such a way that the W splits into two V's. So really what you read is the VV itch. And what, I ask you, is the VV itch? Well, I venture to say, first, that the VV itch is a vivid and undeniable sign. It is vivid and undeniable evidence that the planetary animal mother who invites human animals into the field of her Gaian witchcraft is sending subliminal signals into the exopsyche to announce that invitation. In short, if this makes more sense, the Aeon Sophia, who is the supreme witch on this planet and the whore of wisdom, is now able, 5 seconds into correction, to accomplish her own form of subliminal signaling and predictive programming, such as is attributed, often wrongly, to the sociopathic predators. We've all heard endless stories hyping the ability of the fiendish psychopaths of the planet, the Illuminati, the Jewish cabal, whatever you want to call them. We've all heard stories hyping their ability to perpetrate black magic upon the human mind, to exercise trauma-based mind control through the media, and to use symbols and clues and memes in order to infect the human mind and to control and direct it toward their evil ends. You've all heard those stories, right? Well, now I offer you the soft option. You can choose to believe in those stories and listen to the people who promote them and thereby give power to the perpetrators, or you can entirely turn them off and only listen to me. Only listen to everything that I've already said. That would occupy you for 10 years at least. And you want to hear more. Well, I may get around to more and I may not. I'm certainly get around to more to people that I meet face to face in the flesh. I can't guarantee that I will get around to more in this archontic medium. But as a parting message, I leave you the soft option. Sophia's correction is a diorthosis. It's a 2-part solution. You get to choose the world that you want to live in. But you have to choose it every day, and you have to act out that choice and talk about that choice as much as you can. You can choose to live in the world where the sublime beauty and power of Gaian witchcraft changes the fate of humanity, one person at a time. Or you can live in the world of bad news and all of the hype that comes from the perpetrators and even from those who allege to be exposing the perpetrators. You can live in the world of all that hype and all that disinformation that gives them all the power and makes it look as if there is no counter magic to theirs. I am the agent of that counter magic. I am releasing an infernal wave of divine feminine witchcraft upon this planet. And your option is to choose which world you want to be in. Which side you want to be on, to put it crudely. Do you want to be on the side of the witches? Or do you want to be on the side of the Puritans and the fundamentalists whether they be Jews, Christians, or Arabs, or Hindus, or Confucianists. Which world do you want to live in? Choose that world every day when you wake up. Take 2 minutes in silent mind and go to the prompt that asks you, or that compels you to wonder, what is the ultimate source of this world I find myself in as I wake up today? Then go to the local prompt that asks you to wonder, what is the immediate and local source of my life and of my life story? Who sustains my life story? Who gave me the story of my life so that I could live it as if it were my own? Who could be that generous as to give me a physical existence in this world called nature, upon this planet, and at the same time allow me to have the story of my life as if it were my own life, independent of anything and anybody? Ask yourself that question. And ask yourself the question, is there any God capable of creating this material universe and this planet who would also inflict punishment and cruelty upon the inhabitants of this world? Ask yourself those questions. Those are the questions that prompt you and prepare you to consider the soft option. You don't have to be a warrior, although I would deeply appreciate it. I would deeply appreciate it if you would recognize who the warriors are. But you don't have to be a warrior, you just have to choose what world that you want to be in. I take the VVH as a sign that the narrative is growing in favor of the goddess and the anthropos. The narrative of magic, the belief in witches, if you want to call it that. It's a term that comes up in Salem. Unfortunately, the great flaw of this series consists, and you will certainly anticipate what I'm going to say now, in the complete inability of the writers and the producers, some of whom are Jubus, unfortunately, first to represent the power and innocence of the human animal in its own right, and second, the inability to represent in any fair or credible manner the actual magic and spells that witches perform. What you get is ridiculous schoolgirl spells of women reciting fairy tale verses that are supposed to produce a magical effect. This is totally ludicrous. What you get are subliminal glimpses of some monstrous face or some goat-like god or even a dark goat leaping up in the wilderness, and this is supposed to represent the presence of Lucifer, whom they worship. This is ridiculous. Not even a 6-year-old child is going to go for this anymore. But how about showing the children some real magic and how to do it? I have given you the formula and the kit for that magic in Planetary Tantra. I realize that I have not completed that task adequately, but that's not a fault due to my intention or my capacity. It is a fault due to my circumstances, and mainly to the circumstance of isolation. So I promise you that I will do the absolute best I can in the remainder of my life to complete the instruction in Gaian Tantric magic, including Kala Tantra sexual magic, and every other aspect of Planetary Tantra involving a power-sharing pact with the Mahavidyas and the Diamond Sky Dakinis. That's what I'm here for. That's what I live for. That's my fate. That's my privilege. And nothing can stop me in that commitment. The news that I have for you, in addition to this little commentary about the VV itch would be incomplete if I did not include some other incremental changes that I see that show that the war for the narrative is shifting on the front lines in favor of the goddess. But before I mention those incremental changes, which also relate to your choice each day, each morning, to the world you want to live in, I want to make one final comment about the VV itch. VV itch, as I said, is evidence that the Aeon Sophia, through the power of her second attention, is leaking subliminal signals about her witchcraft into the human mind. It's not only that, but it's also an actual phenomenon in the emotional body of the human species, you could say. You know, Wilhelm Reich talked about the emotional plague, which is kind of like a rabies of the emotional body. I was not able to comment on that as I had wished, but you can go and research it and find his article on the emotional plague extracted from Character Analysis, and read it and study it and keep it under your pillow. The emotional plague is like a case of rabies in the emotional body of the human animal. The VV itch is also working in the emotional body of the human animal. And this is how I would say the VV itch works. Everybody's going to get the itch now, because the powers of the earth goddess are reaching the anthropos at no matter what condition of degeneracy or denial the human individual may stand. And so, what happens when you feel an itch? Well, you got to scratch it. Everyone will be scratching the VV itch without even knowing what it is. And some people will scratch that itch till they harm themselves scratching it. Others who scratch that itch will find themselves magically transformed into witches and warlocks. This is how the VV itch works. So finally, again, to bring home to you what I am trying to say about the soft option, I see incremental changes happening that are bound to make this option easier for you. One of the incremental changes is that the whole social justice warrior / liberal propaganda con is collapsing. More and more people are saying what you are not allowed to say. More and more people are in Red Ice interviews, for instance, which is one place, and also in other talks on the internet. More and more people are routinely saying that the Jews hold the executive position in planetary evil, which is a statement that I made, in social evil, which is a statement that I've made some years ago now. Particular Jews. Let me correct the syntax for you. And you should use the corrected syntax when you're looking at the soft option. Do you want to live in a world today, when you wake up, from the moment you wake up, in which particular Jews hold the executive position in social evil? Or do you want to live in a world where the wild beauty of Gaian witchcraft defeats such fiends? If you want to live in the world of the magic to defeat those particular Jews, the Cabal Jews, as I might call them, then I can assure you that that magic is available. to defeat them at every level, at the level of Kabbalistic magic, going back to their primary manual of archontic magic, the Zohar, at the level of their racial identity psyop. The magic is there to defeat them. Do you want to live in a world where you participate in that magic each day? Or do you just want to sit back and watch the devastations of social evil unfold around you and complain about it and point the finger of blame and wonder why it isn't otherwise? It isn't otherwise. It ain't gonna be otherwise unless you choose which world you want to live in. You go about your day acting out that choice and communicating that choice on every possible occasion, no matter what the consequences. Now, another incremental change I see that makes it easier for you to choose this soft option, riding on the tsunami wave of the Divine Mother's magic, is that it is becoming more and more implausible to call people names and think it's going to shut them up. The racist label is wearing very, very thin. The appeal to the Holocaust extortion game is wearing very, very thin. I have palpably felt the tide shifting in the last year and a half. Register this. We are 5 seconds into her correction in 18 months. 5 seconds into her correction. In the discourse, public discourse of the human animal, in the operations of the exopsyche, that which would oppose truth is breaking down and weakening on every front. To accuse someone of being a racist doesn't fly anymore. At least it doesn't fly in the way it did 6 months or a year ago or 5 years ago. There are people, more and more people every day, who are just choosing to override that, who are not intimidated by being called a racist. I'm not intimidated by being called a racist because someone put the David Duke interview with Alex Jones on the Facebook page under my name. I don't know if David Duke is a racist or not, but whether or not he is, what is he saying? And is it true? Maybe even a racist can see the truth and tell the truth. The whole issue of white genocide, which I came to at the end of the GNE, rather to the surprise and dismay of some of you, is going huge. Currently in Europe, there is a war taking place. Europe is at war. And the war zone, the front line, is the forced illegal immigration line, which is a business. It's a business bringing illegal immigrants into the European countries and flooding them with these people whom we are asked to consider as refugees. They are not refugees. They are just dupes and pawns in a game. And the reaction toward this game is mounting and escalating in a manner which it is impossible to keep track of how fast the reaction is mounting. If you want to go look at the YouTube channel Race for Survival with the number 4, you'll find clear and sober reports on what is happening in Europe and the blowback against the human Zionist agenda of forced immigration to destroy the indigenous peoples of Europe. You'll find that the blowback is massive. This is yet another incremental sign that the battle for the narrative is shifting to the advantage of the anthropos and our divine planetary mother. To conclude, I want to refer back to the point I mentioned about a celestial omen at the start of this recording. That would be Venus retrograde. She is still retrograde until the 7th of September. She's hovering in the right claw of the crab. Immediately in proximity is the planet Mars. They're conjunct on the 1st of September, exact conjunction. This conjunction sort of repeats or recalls the conjunction of the new moon with Venus in that exact same position on the 15th of August. The omen indicates to me that there are behind-the-scenes developments that need not be openly described. Developments that arise directly from the power of the planetary animal mother as she can reach us, as she can reach human animals through planetary tantra. That is how she reaches us. That is the primary way she reaches us. Planetary tantra, the Terma of Gaia Awakening, presents the instructions and method for interaction with the planetary animal mother. Interactive magic with Gaia. Can I make it any more simple than that? In a little over 7 years now, with no wide-scale promotion, no marketing and publicity whatsoever, what I presented in the Terma is maturing and manifesting. You may be able to glimpse Mars and Venus in the morning sky looking east, the beginning of September. They will certainly be visible higher in the morning sky toward the end of October, when Venus, Mars, and Jupiter converge in the loins of the lion. The connections developing right now are among the most powerful that I have seen since planetary tantra was inaugurated. In particular, there is a bond forming, an alliance forming between those in PT and the indigenous Native American practices, particularly of the Southwest. It's rather amazing that Castaneda, who set the stage for planetary tantra, presented his teachings through a Yaqui brujo, a Yaqui sorcerer. It is that same Yaqui connection that comes into play now. These connections forming are like powerful junctures of electric cables. When you join the two cables, when you buckle the cables, there are sparks. The cables act convulsively like snakes. There is some violent activity at the beginning of the connection, whether it be the connection of the Yaqui wisdom and practice with planetary tantra, or the connection of pagan witchcraft and Wicca with planetary tantra. All these connections are made through individuals. They are volatile connections, and sometimes the buckling of the cables will not hold. But nevertheless, as long as the connection is made, there is a transfusion of force across that joint, across that juncture. There's a lot of power in planetary tantra. It's volatile, it's turbulent, and it is not always possible to hold it conveniently or comfortably within the framework of human relations. But no matter, the connections are being made. The alliance with the Yaqui magic is happening as I speak, and other alliances all across the planet are happening in ways that foster this magic. So I advise you to look to the Venus-Mars conjunction as a sign of these convergences and alliances. It's also a sign of the ultimate healing of the gender rift and the alliance between the masculine and the feminine genders of the anthropos. Remember that I said, and I'll leave you with this as a final word, regarding those who come into the Kalika War Party, but this applies as well to those of you who take the soft option of just living the dream as your life allows. Remember that I said that the conditions are clear and simple. Men must surrender their despair about women, and women surrender their anger toward men. And then the healing can happen. Then the healing is assured. Bear that thought as a meditation you carry in the days ahead, and bear in mind that the celestial counterpart of that thought, the celestial evidence, stands in the dawn sky in September of 2015.